The air was thick with dust, the sky painted in shades of red and gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was supposed to be just another mission. One final sweep through an abandoned village before heading back to base. But war has a way of rewriting endings. Sergeant Ryan Cole adjusted his grip on his rifle, his eyes scanning the narrow alleyways ahead. The silence was the kind that made the hair on his neck stand up, the kind that usually meant trouble. Beside him, his German shepherd, Atlas, moved like a shadow, ears pricked, nose twitching, his body tense with the kind of instinct no human could match. A war dog's instinct. "Stay close, buddy," Ryan murmured under his breath, though he knew Atlas didn't need to be told. Atlas had been with Ryan for years. Through the worst of it, he wasn't just a military K-9. He was family. And today, this was their last mission together. After this, Atlas was going home. Retired. Safe. Ryan had told himself he should be happy about that. Atlas had done more than enough. He had saved lives, taken bullets, sniffed out explosives where one wrong move could have meant disaster. But the thought of letting him go, that was a battle Ryan wasn't ready for. A sudden noise snapped him back. A creaking door. A flicker of movement. Atlas growled low, muscles coiled, ready. Ryan lifted his hand in a silent signal. Wait. His heart pounded as he moved toward the building, rifle raised. Atlas followed, his body pressed low against the ground, his sharp eyes locked on the dark doorway ahead. Ryan took a slow step forward. Another. Then boom. The explosion ripped through the air, a shockwave that knocked Ryan off his feet. Atlas yelped, a sound Ryan had never heard before. Then came the ringing. Muffled shouts. The taste of blood in his mouth. Through the dust and debris, Ryan forced himself up, heart hammering in his chest. And then he saw him. Atlas, lying motionless in the dirt. For the first time in years, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt since his first day in combat. Fear. He scrambled toward Atlas, ignoring the gunfire erupting around them. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the dog's side, searching for a wound, for something, anything. Atlas' chest rose. A shallow breath. Ryan's own lungs released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Atlas was alive. Barely. But the mission wasn't over. And neither was their fight. Ryan's pulse hammered in his ears, his hands pressing against Atlas' side. Warmth. Wet. Blood. Not a lot, but enough. "Stay with me, buddy," Ryan muttered, his voice barely steady. Atlas' eyes fluttered open for a second, just enough for recognition to flicker through them. He was still here, still fighting. Ryan exhaled sharply, forcing himself to focus. They weren't safe yet. Gunfire rattled through the air, bouncing off the crumbling walls of the abandoned village. The explosion had set off a chain reaction. Whoever had set the trap wasn't working alone. Ryan's radio crackled. "Cole. Status." It was Staff Sergeant Blake, their unit leader, his voice sharp, urgent. Ryan reached for his radio, keeping his other hand steady on Atlas. "K-9 down, minor injuries. Hostiles in the area. Can you move?" Ryan gritted his teeth. No, not yet. Not while Atlas was down. But then Atlas shifted. He let out a low, determined grunt and pushed himself onto his paws. Ryan's breath caught. The dog refused to stay down. Even after taking the brunt of the explosion, even after being thrown into the dirt, Atlas still wanted to move. Ryan didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. "Yeah," he said into the radio. "We're moving." He reached into his vest, grabbing a field dressing. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. He pressed it gently against the wound, tightening a bandage around Atlas' side. "You good?" Ryan asked. Atlas gave a slow wag of his tail, as if telling him not to worry. Ryan swallowed hard and gave him a quick scratch behind the ears. "That's my boy." They had to move now. Ryan adjusted his rifle, keeping Atlas close at his side as they sprinted toward the nearest cover. Every muscle in his body screamed to stop and tend to his partner, but there was no time. A few meters ahead, the rest of the unit was holding position, their rifles trained on the rooftops, scanning for movement. Ryan slid into position behind a low wall, Atlas dropping beside him. Blake turned, his face grim. What the hell happened? Trap. Someone knew we were coming. Blake cursed under his breath, then turned to the squad. We need to pull out. Now. But Ryan's got twisted. Something wasn't right. If this had been a standard ambush, there would have been more enemy fire by now. Instead, the attack had been sudden, a single, devastating strike. A warning. His grip on his rifle tightened. We're not the target. Blake frowned. What are you talking about? Ryan's stomach sank as the realization set in. They wanted Atlas. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan looked down at Atlas, who was still breathing hard but alert, ears pricked, scanning the area. Someone had set that trap knowing a war dog would be on this mission. Someone wanted him taken out. Ryan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the war. This was personal. And whoever was behind it. They weren't done yet. The air smelled of gunpowder and dust, the fading echoes of gunfire still ringing in Ryan's ears. Atlas was hurt. The ambush wasn't random. Someone had set this trap specifically for them. Ryan kept his breathing steady, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't afford to let emotions cloud his judgment, not now. Blake crouched beside him, his expression hard. You're sure about this? That they were after Atlas? Ryan glanced at the dog beside him. Atlas was a soldier, a survivor. He had fought beside Ryan for years. But more than that, he was different. Smarter. Sharper. And someone knew it. I don't believe in coincidences, Ryan muttered. Blake exhaled sharply. All right. But right now, we need to get the hell out of here. Ryan gave a quick nod, adjusting his grip on his rifle. Atlas stayed close, his breathing labored but steady, his keen eyes scanning their surroundings. Even injured, he was ready. Ryan hated that. He should be resting, not walking into more danger. Evac's 10 minutes out, Blake said. We hold position here. Ryan pressed his back against the wall, eyes locked on the shadows stretching through the alleyways. He felt it, the weight of unseen eyes watching them. Atlas must have felt it too. His ears twitched, his nose flaring slightly. A silent warning. Then, in the distance, a flicker of movement. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He lifted his rifle, just as a figure darted between buildings. Too fast to get a clear shot. He cursed under his breath. They weren't alone. Contact north side, he said lowly. Blake nodded, signaling the others. Stay sharp. Another shadow moved. Then another. Whoever they weren't charging in. Ryan's grip tightened around his weapon. They were waiting. Then, Atlas let out a low growl. Ryan turned just as a voice rang out from the shadows. You have something we want. The word sent a chill down Ryan's spine. This wasn't just some random group of insurgents. This was planned. Personal. Ryan shifted slightly, keeping his voice even. Yeah, and what's that? Silence. Then the voice came again. We both know. Ryan's stomach twisted. They weren't after weapons. They weren't after the team. They wanted Atlas. Blake shot Ryan a look. He'd heard it too. Ryan didn't hesitate. Move. Now. Blake gave the signal. And just like that, the team was on their feet, pushing toward the extraction point. Atlas limped beside Ryan, his breathing heavier. But he never slowed down. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets chipped at the walls, kicking up dust as Ryan pushed forward. They weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to slow them down. The realization only made Ryan move faster. If these people wanted Atlas, they weren't getting him. Not today. The chopper came into view, just as another explosion rocked the ground behind them. Ryan didn't stop, didn't look back. He just ran. And Atlas, he ran with him. The helicopter's rotors sliced through the thick desert air, dust swirling in violent spirals as Ryan sprinted toward the open bay. His boots hit the dirt hard, every muscle in his body pushing forward. Atlas was right beside him, wounded but still running. Bullets ripped past them, kicking up shards of concrete and sand. Whoever these people were, they weren't giving up. Blake was already inside, signaling them forward. Move, move, move. Ryan grabbed Atlas by the harness and lifted him onto the chopper. The dog let out a small grunt, his body tense. But he didn't resist. He trusted Ryan. The second Ryan's boots left the ground, The crew chief yelled, "We're up!" The chopper tilted as it climbed, pulling them away from the battlefield below. Ryan barely had time to breathe before his hands were back on Atlas, checking the wound again. The bleeding had slowed, but the damage was done. The dog winced but didn't flinch. His chest rose and fell, slower than Ryan wanted. Blake crouched beside them, sweat dripping down his forehead. "You good?" Ryan exhaled. "Not until we find out who the hell that was." Blake ran a hand down his face. "Who goes after a war dog like that? They weren't just trying to take us out. They wanted Atlas." Ryan already knew that, and he didn't like where his thoughts were heading. He turned to the medic on board. "How bad?" The medic checked Atlas over, pressing down gently near the wound. "Lucky. It could have been worse. He's got some internal bruising, and he's gonna need stitches. But he'll make it." Ryan clenched his jaw, nodding. He wasn't going to let this be Atlas' last mission. Not like this. The chopper banked hard, and through the open bay door, Ryan caught a glimpse of the ground below, a maze of buildings and shifting shadows. Something gnawed at him. They had been ambushed. Someone knew their position. Someone knew they'd be there. This wasn't just war. This was a message. Ryan didn't realize how tight his fists had clenched until he felt a familiar nudge against his arm. Atlas. Even injured, even exhausted, the dog was watching him, reading him the same way he always had, the same way he had in the darkest moments of battle. Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat. "We'll figure it out, buddy. I promise." Atlas blinked once, slow. He believed him. But trust only went so far. Back at base, a new threat emerges. The base was a fortress of steel and concrete. But Ryan didn't feel safe. Not after what happened. The second the chopper touched down, Atlas was rushed to the medic station. Ryan never left his side, even as stitches were carefully threaded through the wound in his side. When it was over, Atlas lay still, his breathing steady but tired. Ryan sat next to him, one hand resting on the dog's paw. Blake appeared in the doorway. "Intel's got something." Ryan didn't move. "Tell me." Blake exhaled. "We ran the faces from the ambush through the database. They're not locals." Ryan's brow furrowed. "Then who the hell are they?" Blake hesitated. "Private contractors." Ryan's stomach dropped. "You mean mercenaries?" Blake gave a sharp nod. "Hired guns. No official ties, no flags, no names. Someone sent them after you." "No, not after him. After Atlas." Ryan stood, his jaw clenched. "Someone paid to take my dog." Blake's expression hardened. "Looks that way." Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. Atlas wasn't just any war dog. He was special. His ability to detect threats, his instinct, his combat awareness. Had someone decided he was too valuable to retire? Ryan felt a familiar burn of rage rise in his chest. Atlas had earned his peace. He had earned his right to rest. And now, someone was trying to take that away. Ryan looked down at Atlas, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Whoever was behind this wasn't just after a war dog. They were after his best friend. And Ryan wasn't going to let them win. The dim lights in the barracks flickered as Ryan sat on the metal bench beside Atlas, his fists clenched, his mind racing. Mercenaries. Paid professionals. Someone wanted Atlas, and they were willing to kill for it. Atlas let out a slow breath, his body rising and falling steadily. But Ryan could see it, the tension still lingering in the dog's muscles. Atlas had felt the danger just as much as he had, and it wasn't over. Blake stepped into the room, his face grim. Intel dug deeper. Ryan straightened, and Blake tossed a folder onto the table. Inside were grainy surveillance photos, financial records, paper trail leading to one name. Liam Carter. Ryan's stomach turned to stone. He knew that name. A former commander turned rogue, Carter had been discharged years ago for illegal arms deals. But that wasn't the worst of it. He had been working on a classified program for advanced military K-9S. Highly trained, high-intelligence dogs meant for combat missions beyond the battlefield. Atlas had been one of the best. And now Carter wanted him back. Ryan exhaled sharply. He's not getting him. Blake nodded. Agreed. But if Carter wants Atlas that bad, he's not done trying. Ryan glanced down at Atlas, who was now awake, ears perked, watching them carefully. "I don't care what it takes," Ryan said, his voice low and firm. "We end this. Now." Blake studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then we go on the offensive." Ryan ran a hand down Atlas' fur. The dog was still healing, but he wasn't broken. Not yet, and neither was Ryan, because if Carter wanted a war, he was about to get one. The night was quiet, too quiet. Ryan stood near the edge of the base, gripping his rifle, his muscles coiled. He could feel it. Something was coming. Atlas sat beside him, ears twitching at every shift in the wind. Even injured, the dog was locked in, sensing what Ryan sensed. Blake had set up additional security around the perimeter, but Ryan knew better than to feel safe. Liam Carter wasn't the kind of man to back down after one failed attempt, and Ryan had no intention of waiting for him to strike first. "We take the fight to him," Ryan had told Blake earlier that day. "If we sit here, we're just waiting for them to finish the job." Blake had agreed, but that didn't mean it was going to be easy. A light buzz came through Ryan's earpiece. Movement outside the east gate. A soldier's voice crackled through. No visual yet, but something's off. Ryan's heart pounded once, then twice. This was it. "Stay sharp." Blake's voice came over the comms. "Eyes on everything." Ryan took one last glance at Atlas. The dog's muscles were tense, his eyes sharp, ready. Ryan exhaled. "Let's finish this." "The attack begins." The first shot rang out before the call even came through. Ryan ducked low, pressing his back against the concrete barricade as bullets rained against the outer walls of the base. The attack had started. Contact. Multiple hostiles approaching from the east and south perimeters. The soldier's voice crackled through the radio. Ryan's grip tightened around his rifle. Carter had come prepared. Atlas let out a low growl, poised for action. "Atlas stays with me," Ryan ordered. "Blake, get your team ready. We push forward. Take them out before they breach the base." Blake didn't hesitate. "Copy that." Ryan moved swiftly, staying low as he maneuvered through the shadows. Carter's men weren't just mercenaries. They were trained, organized. They wanted one thing. Atlas. Ryan's blood boiled over his dead body. Gunfire erupted all around them. The sharp stench of gunpowder filled the air. Ryan aimed, firing precise shots, taking down 2 men before they could advance further. Atlas stayed locked in at his side, moving like a shadow, his instincts sharper than ever. Then movement. A figure slipped through the chaos, cutting toward the far end of the compound. Not toward the soldiers. Toward Atlas. Ryan's chest tightened. Carter. The man had come himself. Ryan bolted forward, instinct screaming. "Cover me!" he yelled over the comms. Atlas followed, his paws kicking up dust as they sprinted toward the shadowed figure. But Carter wasn't running away. He was waiting. And just as Ryan reached the clearing, Carter stepped into the dim light, gun raised. "I was hoping you'd come," Carter said, voice calm, almost amused. His eyes flicked to Atlas, and he smiled. He always was the best. Ryan's fingers tightened on the trigger. "Step back." Carter tilted his head. "Come on, Cole. You and I both know this isn't over until I get what I came for." Ryan clenched his jaw. Atlas was ready, his muscles tight, waiting for Ryan's command. "You're not taking him," Ryan growled. Carter let out a slow sigh, shaking his head. "Do you even know what you're protecting?" His tone was almost mocking. "That dog is worth more than you realize. He's part of something bigger, something you wouldn't understand." Ryan kept his rifle steady. "I understand enough." Carter smiled. "Then you know he doesn't belong to you." Ryan's pulse roared in his ears. "He's not a weapon. He's not some program. He's my partner." Atlas let out a sharp bark, his stance unshaken. Carter's face darkened. "You always were too sentimental, Cole." His fingers twitched. Ryan didn't wait. He moved first. A single gunshot rang through the air, but it wasn't Ryan's. The gunshot echoed through the night. Ryan braced for the impact, expecting pain, but it never came. Instead, Carter staggered back, a sharp grunt escaping his lips as he clutched his shoulder. The shot had hit him, But it hadn't come from Ryan's rifle. Ryan's eyes flicked to the side. Blake, rifle steady. His face unreadable. Couldn't let you have all the fun, Blake muttered, stepping forward. Carter stumbled but didn't fall. Blood seeped through his shirt, but the smirk never left his face. This isn't over, he rasped, his hand already reaching for something at his waist. Ryan's gut twisted, a detonator. Carter's thumb hovered over the trigger. You take me in, this whole place goes up. He sneered. Ryan didn't blink. You're bluffing. Carter grinned. Try me. Atlas let out a low, rumbling growl. His body was coiled, ready to strike. Ryan had a second. 1 second to act. Then Atlas moved first. A blur of muscle and fur, Atlas lunged, clamping his jaws around Carter's wrist. The man let out a strangled yell, the detonator dropping from his grasp as he hit the ground. Ryan moved just as fast, kicking the device away before it could be activated. The fight was over. Carter struggled, but Atlas kept him pinned, his sharp eyes locked on Ryan, waiting for the next command. Ryan lowered his weapon and walked forward, standing over Carter. Not today. Blake signaled to the incoming soldiers. Taken. The mercenaries, leaderless, defeated, had either scattered or surrendered. The battle was done. Ryan turned to Atlas, his heartbeat finally slowing. The dog looked up at him, chest heaving, blood on his fur, but fire in his eyes. Ryan knelt down, pressing his forehead to Atlas. You did good, buddy. Atlas huffed, tail flicking once. For the first time in a long time, Ryan felt something other than war. He felt peace. The dust had settled, the gunfire had stopped, and the night had finally gone still. Ryan stood beside Atlas, his hand resting on the dog's thick fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. They had made it. Carter was hauled off in restraints, his face pale, but his expression still defiant. Even after all this, the man had the nerve to smirk. You think this is over? He muttered as the soldiers dragged him toward a waiting convoy. Ryan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Carter had lost. Blake came up beside him, shaking his head. That guy doesn't know when to quit. Ryan exhaled, his shoulders finally relaxing for the first time in days. Doesn't matter. He's done. Blake glanced down at Atlas, who was still standing strong despite everything, despite the blood, the wounds, the exhaustion. You know, Blake said, his voice quieter. Not every war dog would have made it out of this. Ryan already knew that. Atlas wasn't just any canine. He had proven that time and time again. And now, he had nothing left to prove. Ryan knelt beside him, running a hand over his fur. That's it, buddy, he murmured. No more missions. You're coming home. Atlas blinked up at him, and for the first time since they'd reunited, he looked truly at peace. Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat. He had spent years preparing for war, but no one had prepared him for this moment. What came after? Where did a soldier go when the fight was finally over? 1 week later, a new beginning. Ryan sat on the porch of his family's ranch, his boots propped up on the wooden railing. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth and fresh pine, a far cry from the dust and gunpowder that had been his world for so long. Atlas lay beside him, his tail thumping lazily against the wood, his eyes half closed in the afternoon sun. For the first time in his life, Atlas had nothing to guard, no battle to fight. He was home. Ryan took a sip of his coffee, staring out at the rolling hills beyond the fence line. Blake had called that morning. Carter had been officially charged and would never be a threat again. That should have felt like closure. But Ryan had learned something about himself in the past few days. War had been his identity for too long. Letting go wasn't as easy as it should have been. He looked down at Atlas, who was watching him with those sharp, knowing eyes. You miss it too, don't you? Ryan murmured. Atlas let out a small huff, resting his head on Ryan's boot. Ryan chuckled. Yeah, I thought so. But the truth was, they had both earned this. A new life, a new purpose, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills, casting long golden shadows across the ranch. Ryan sat on the porch, his coffee forgotten beside him, watching Atlas stretch out in the grass, belly up, tail flicking lazily. For the first time in years, there was no tension in his body. No battle waiting to be fought. Atlas had always been a soldier, a protector, a warrior. But now he was just a dog. Ryan exhaled slowly, letting the peace settle over him. He wasn't sure what came next, but maybe that was okay. A car pulled up the dirt driveway, dust kicking up behind it. The engine cut off, and after a moment, Blake stepped out, hands in his pockets. "Thought you'd be busy building a bunker out here," Blake joked, stepping onto the porch. Ryan smirked. "Tempting, but I think we've had enough of that life for now." Blake nodded, glancing down at Atlas. The dog was watching him, but not like a soldier sizing up a threat, just a dog curious and calm. "You did right by him," Blake said, letting him have this. Ryan swallowed. "Yeah." His fingers curled around the arm of his chair. "Still feels strange, though, not having a mission." Blake was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Maybe you just need a different kind of mission." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What are you getting at?" Blake pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. "Veteran K-9 Rehabilitation Program. They help retrain retired war dogs, get them into good homes. Thought maybe you'd want to get involved." Ryan stared at the paper for a long moment. He thought about all the dogs he had seen over the years. The ones who had given everything, just like Atlas. The ones who never got to see what came after. Slowly, he picked up the paper, rubbing his thumb over the edges. Atlas lifted his head, watching him carefully. Ryan glanced down at him and smiled. "What do you think, buddy? Think we've got one more mission in us?" Atlas let out a low huff and thumped his tail against the porch. Ryan chuckled. "Yeah, me too." And as the sun set over the quiet ranch, for the first time in years, Ryan knew exactly where he was meant to be. Home.